welcome to our next lesson. So today we are going to be looking at a brand new market structure. It's my favourite market structure. I think it's really interesting, it's really topical, loads of exam questions, kind of the favourite of the exam board. I think it's quite, clear to say that. So we are looking at oligopoly market structures. Now we've finished with perfect competition, we've finished with monopolistic market structures, and now we are looking at oligopolies. So I thought we'd kind of do things a little bit differently. So I'm going to give you some examples of market structures, you're going to pause, and then you are going to come up with kind of a list of characteristics that all of these industries share. So we've got supermarkets here. I'm going to go with the UK supermarket industry. So kind of thinking about that. Mobile phones, think about that industry, think about these two, what they have in common. Oil and gas, I don't know if many of you will know a lot about that. Obviously I put that there especially because it's so topical at the moment. And also one of the most kind of famous oligopolies, I think. Automobiles, so the car industry, sports clothing, especially trainers. I think you'll find it useful to think about trainers, and games consoles, so the games consoles market. So I suggest you kind of pause that and then think about what these markets have in common and come up with kind of a list of characteristics on your own. Okay, so pause. So what I'm kind of expecting you to come up with is not all of this at once, we'll go through it. So what are oligopolies? Like, what is our definition? So this is kind of our definition with a rough kind of guide, rule of thumb that we have. So an oligopoly is a market structure that is dominated by a few firms. So in each one of those, if you think about the supermarkets, you've got like Tesco's, Asda, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, like a few firms that you can list off the top of your head. I know that kind of like Lidl and Aldi's are coming for the big ones, but there are, those kind of big ones that you can think of straight away. Same with like the car industry, clothing, trainers, you've got Nike, Adidas, they're the kind of two kind of big players in that market. So our rule of thumb, this isn't always true, sometimes we have slightly more in there, it might be 7, but firms, so kind of 2 to 6 firms, like I said, maybe 7, who have 60% or more of the market structure. A good one to have a look into, to maybe like research for yourselves, is the betting industry in the UK, because that's actually kind of textbook perfect oligopoly, 6 firms, 60% each one, kind of 10 or 11% each. So this kind of relating here is all about what we call a concentration ratio. Make sure you've got that written down. So concentration ratio is the amount of firms and their market share. So we'll have a look at that later on and you'll see an example of how we use that. So this is our definition, this is our rule of thumb, and then we've got some kind of characteristics here that we can have a look at and compare to some of those market structures that you looked at right at the start. So the first one is that there's loads of non-price competition, right? Loads of non-price competition in the market. So that allows us to kind of tap into that irrational consumer behaviour. So allow firms to have a huge amount of price setting power. The more irrational consumer behaviour we have, the more price setting power a firm has. So some ways that we see that, just for some examples for you that you can think of. Branding. Loads of branding, let's think about that kind of sports industry, loads of branding, loads of advertising. How many of you, if your trainers didn't have Adidas or Nike written on them, would have bought those trainers, would be wearing them, would be so proud? It's the brand, it's the name. And the advertising, that might well be a campaign specifically, or a celebrity that they're using to advertise that you identify with. All of those tap into irrational consumer behaviour and a non-price competition. Also got a lot of other, and these are really stereotypical. Remember when we looked at monopolistic market structures, we had that exam question that kind of related that there isn't any large marketing campaigns, there isn't large advertising in oligopolies everywhere. Customer service, so it may well be that firms don't compete on price, but actually they compete on the service that you get. And I think the kind of maybe the supermarket industry might be an example of that. Maybe, I'm not saying this is 100% true, but maybe I know that Waitrose and John Lewis pride themselves on the customer service, and they are able to charge more because they have that kind of selling point of customer service compared to some of the other supermarkets in the industry. Or it might be opening hours, so like 24 hours a day, or they have customer service online 24 hours, so if you're shopping at 11 o'clock at night, and they might compete, and you can speak to somebody, they might compete that way rather than this brand is cheaper than this brand. So goods in this market tend to be relatively homogenous, like a pair of trainers, if we're talking about the kind of trainer industry, it's not that unique. They serve a purpose. Firms are able to kind of brand them, advertise them, but actually they're relatively a similar product. So another one is there's huge barriers to entry or exit, and to kind of reiterate that, I just want you to think about how easy it would be for you to compete and enter one of these markets compared to something like monopolistic market structure. We spoke about bakeries and how you could set up a bakery. You definitely couldn't set up a supermarket tomorrow, and there are some very, clear reasons why that couldn't happen. So the first one is very high sunk costs. So sunk costs, again, just to reiterate, are costs that you can't get back when you exit the market. So they're costs that you spend to enter the market or while you're in the market that you can't recoup when you leave. So advertising is an example of a sunk cost. So huge advertising campaign. If I wanted to open a supermarket tomorrow, I would have to compete with Tesco's or Asda or Morrison's, Sainsbury's. I'd have to just invest a huge amount of advertising to get people to come and to compete with those individuals. Some other barriers to entry and exit are pricing strategies. So a firm, like one of the large firms, may choose to predatory price or limit price. We're going to do a whole video just on those pricing strategies, so don't worry too much. And then another barrier to entry or exit is cartels. So we're going to have a look at cartels. Don't worry too much about cartels. Don't think that they're anything different to something that you know as well. Like if you watch Narcos, that is a cartel. That's they stole the word term from economics. Economics did not steal the term from them. And they're really interesting, and we will actually have a look at kind of drug cartels later on in this kind of series of oligopoly videos. You have another 8 to look forward to, so enjoy that. So we're going to have a much more kind of detailed look at these, but they're definitely prominent, they definitely happen, and they have a huge amount of power, and they're super, super interesting. And then the last one is kind of really the most important one that I really want to spend kind of just a bit of time looking at. So interdependent decision making, what does that mean? So interdependent decision making means that I make my decision based on the other firms in the market. Right? So firms make their decisions kind of together. Whether they do that overtly or whether they naturally do that is something that we will look at in another video as well. But interdependent decision making in oligopolies actually means that oligopolies very rarely make their decisions based on consumers and consumer needs and consumer wants. Actually, they make their decisions based on each other. So Tesco's may make a decision based on what it thinks Asda is going to do, right? So it may not be, oh, we've made some savings with our supplier and therefore we could charge a lower price for our consumers. They might not decide to make that decision for consumers. They're more likely to be like, okay, we've made some savings with our supplier, but if we lower our prices, then Asda's going to lower their prices, and we're going to enter into something that's going to be like a price war. We're going to look at that later on. And then they might decide not to, right? And they might decide not to, not because it's good for the consumer, but actually because they base their decision on what they think their kind of competition is going to do, right? And again, it may well be that to lower prices, if Asda lower prices, Tesco's may decide to lower prices as well, not because of consumers, not because of any savings, but actually because they think that Asda is going to lower their prices, so they also are going to lower their prices. So there's a lot of interdependent decision making. The decisions that one firm makes is actually mainly focused on other firms in the market rather than consumers in the market. And we'll have a look at why this happens when we have a look at the diagram coming up next. So what I would like you to do, think about these characteristics, think about this, and I want you to think about what the diagram may look like, how we can take this information and represent it in our theory of the firm diagram, our cost and revenue diagram. So have a think about it, pause, try and draw a diagram, and then we will have a look at the diagram together. Okay, so how can we draw this diagram? So we've got cost and revenues exactly the same. And this is our quantity. So the first thing that we draw, the kind of, the sequence of drawing the diagrams, is we look at our AR and MR. So what do we think our AR and MR is going to look like here? Well, let's think about those. Let's think about that characteristics. So there's very few firms in the market. So if there's very few firms in the market, how much choice do consumers have? Well, not very much. So if consumers only have a choice of really, up to 7 firms in the market, what do you think the AR and the MR will look like? Well, we know that all we have to do is think about what the demand curve for that firm, not for the industry, but for that firm, will look like. Well, if you've got all of the market and there's only 7 firms in the market, well, you don't really have very much choice. Consumers don't really have very much choice, so that's going to be a very inelastic demand curve. Firms are going to have a lot of price setting power. There's not many of them. Like if Tesco's increases their prices, well, I've only really got 3 or 4 others that I can go to. So very inelastic. Well, we can represent that on our AR and MR, and we just have quite an inelastic AR and MR. So I haven't really followed my own rules here. I'm just going to redraw this MR actually. Halfway down, even I make mistakes. So MR there. So with our average costs and our marginal costs pretty much stays the same. That's a common rule across all market structures actually. So I'm just going to draw that here, like that. Average cost. So is our average cost different? And if it is different, why is it different? Right? So what's different here compared to a monopolistic market structure? Well, one thing that's massively different, that affects the AC, doesn't really affect the MC, is our advertising. So we have huge amounts of advertising. Just think about like the car market for instance. Think about when you turn on the TV, think about when you're around, like how many adverts do you see for different types of cars? Loads. So our average cost is actually quite high in the oligopoly industry. Firms are always going to be profit maximizers, so they're going to produce what MC equals MR. Here, so this is our quantity, our profit maximizing quantity, and we're going to go up here. We can already see from that firms have a lot of price setting power because their price is very high. So we know that they have a lot of price setting power just from that inelasticity here. Your diagrams really should be a reflection of your kind of theory. So what I'm saying should be reflected in the diagram, and we can see already at the moment it is. And then when it comes to our average cost, I said it's going to be quite high, but firms are making a lot of supernormal profit. There's only 7 of them at maximum really in the market, so firms are making a huge amount of supernormal profit. So, and again, I'm just going to draw my average costs here, and I can see at this price there is a lot of supernormal profits in the market. Now, because of the high barriers of entry and exit to the market, firms really get to cling on to that supernormal profit. The supernormal profit still acts as a signal. Firms still want to enter the market, but they're just not able to because of the high barriers to entry and exit. And because of the high barriers to entry and exit, it means that firms are able to keep their supernormal profit pretty much at all times, right? So firms are able to keep this supernormal profit because of their high barriers to entry and exit that they create. So you don't really need to draw it like this exactly in the exam, and there are a lot of kind of finities here that you can't really tell, but just for you to understand that this diagram is going to look really different. As an examiner, one of the things that I am really going to be looking at and kind of notice is the elasticity of demand. If I've got a really, really elastic oligopoly, AR and MR, it just kind of makes me think, okay, how much does this student actually know? So we're going to, oligopolies, like I said, come up in the exam all the time. Usually your section B will be around in paper 1 and potentially in paper 3 as well. Actually, we have seen that in the past. Do look at oligopoly markets. So we're going to look at an exam question now, really typical exam question, commonly found in the kind of 5-mark question, exactly what we're going to look at, and that is just this one here. So what we've got here is just a kind of pie chart showing the market structure for American zoos. So we've got some firms with their percentage of market share. You've seen this, you'll see this in the exam if you look at, I think it's paper 3, 2018, section A, question 1. This is very typical of that, so it's quite a similar question, so they do come up quite often. We've also seen it in 2019, paper 1, section B, question 1. A very similar question came up as well. So they're very, very common. So we're going to have a look at this now. So with reference to figure 1, this is figure 1 here, explain the market structure that best describes the American zoo market. 5 marks. So what I suggest you do is you pause and you have a go at answering this question. Have a go. If you get stuck, we'll have a look at the next page of the structure and then you can re-pause and have a go, and then we're going to go through a model answer. So just pause now and have a go at answering. So our marks for a 5-mark question is 2 for knowledge, 2 for application, 1 for analysis. I would say the most important thing for you to realise there is that there are no marks for evaluation. You should not be writing, however, this may mean that in a 5-mark question. Please don't do that, it's a waste of your time, you're not going to get many marks for it, you're not going to get any marks for it, so don't do that. It is the only question where you don't need to do evaluation in section B and C. Also, having said that, it's the only question where you actually get marks for a definition. Now, this isn't every single 5-mark question. Some diagram 5-mark questions may not give you the definition mark because you're drawing a diagram, but if it's not a diagram question, you will be expected to put a definition in there. It is the only question that you are required to put a definition into. I know that's really surprising for a lot of you, but it is true. That's because it is a points-based question. This and the 8-mark are your points-based questions. From then on in, your knowledge, application, analysis is marked together in levels. We'll have a look at that later on. Don't worry about it. But for now, you must include your definition in your 5-mark question. 1 line of analysis is all you need. Quite often I see huge, like a page of analysis when I'm marking, and you know, like it kind of like is a little stuck to my heart because I can't see. I see like these students who have written so much stuff that's right, but I can only really give them 1 mark for it because you only get 1 mark for analysis. Just 1 sentence, please. This is another example of a time kind of banker question. And then application comes from the data. You have to reference the data here. So just 2 marks for referencing the data, and we'll have a look at how you can do that, those 2 marks together, or how you can look separately at those different marks. So if you did get a bit confused, or if you've had this feedback now, I suggest maybe you pause it now before we go through the model answer and try and do your answer again. Okay, so let's have a look at the model answer. So this is my model answer here, all about the American zoo market, which some of you may or may not know a lot about, depending on how many of you watched my Netflix watch list over Easter or have been pulled in by the Tiger King world. So the American zoo market is an oligopoly. So that's your answering of the question, basically. It's asked you to identify the market structure that best fits. You said it's an oligopoly. That's correct, and therefore that is 1, your first mark, and that first mark is a knowledge mark, right? You've shown me that you understand what market structure is, you have that knowledge, right? So then you're telling me the definition. So an oligopoly is where 2 to 5 firms have over 60% of the market share. Wonderful. That's my second mark, and equally that's my second knowledge mark. So I've got 2 knowledge marks there. So here we can see the 5 firm concentration ratio is 86%, right? I have combined my application marks. So actually this is my 3rd and my 4th mark, and they're both my application marks. Right, the reason why is because I've done something with the information. So if we kind of go back to this question here, I have done something with the information. I've taken these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've added them up. They're 86%. If you wanted to do that separately, you could say it's an oligopoly with the first 5 firms, with the top 5 firms having over 60% of the market share. You could have kind of named some of those firms. So you said with firm Antle having 23% of the market share, or you could say that firm Antle is the market leader with 23% of the market share. You could add all of these up. You could say that firm Exotic only has 11% of the market share. That might be falling if you watch the documentary. Or rising. Maybe I should change this to Jeff. Maybe I should change it to Jeff, but hey. So you can add all of those up, or you can keep it separate. You could make 2 references separately, but because I added up all 5, that's both my firm, my application marks together. And then I've just got my 1 point of analysis here, which is just relating that to economic content and kind of bringing that back to the question. So therefore firms can create high barriers to entry and exit to the market, right? Because they've got this market share, I've proved that they've got this market share, taken it, and then I've said what they can do with that market share. You could have put another answer there, and you could have said, therefore firms act interdependently of each other. You could have used, or firms are able to run large market kind of advertising campaigns or product placement, any of those things that we discussed at the start. So next lesson, we're going to have a look at pricing strategies. We've got, this kind of section of learning should take us all the way up to the May half term, and I hope that you've enjoyed your learning, and I'll see you next week.